Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. Law enforcement are on the scene in Michigan responding to a vehicle ramming and shooting at a Jewish synagogue. We have the breaking news. The White House is calling on ABC News to retract a story for providing false information why the Trump administration accuses the outlet of intentionally alarming the American people. Senate Majority Leader John Thune saying today that he'll bring the Save America Act to the floor next week. The act, which has been stalled in the Senate for weeks, would make proof of citizenship mandatory in order to register to vote. A bipartisan pair of senators unveiling a new bill aimed at protecting the practitioners of the spiritual meditation practice Falun Gong and countering forced organ harvesting in China. Moody's Ratings downgrades New York City's credit outlook from stable to negative. Mayor Zohran Mamdani says the credit agency's decision is premature.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Before we begin, I want to send our love to the Michigan Jewish community and all of the people in the Detroit area following the attack on the Jewish synagogue early today. And I've been fully briefed, and it's a terrible thing, but it goes on. We're going to be right down to the bottom of it. It's absolutely incredible that things like this happen.
Breaking news out of Michigan. Law enforcement are investigating a car ramming and shooting at a synagogue. The suspect is confirmed dead. The incident took place at the Temple Israel Synagogue just outside Detroit at around 1 p.m. local time. Police say a car intentionally crashed into the building before catching fire. Security personnel engaged one suspect with gunfire. The suspect was later found dead in the vehicle. One security guard was struck by the car and taken to the hospital for treatment. So far, we haven't learned of any other injuries. It's unclear what the motive was for the attack and whether there was any connection to terrorism. The synagogue is home to a preschool. The school says all students and staff are safe. The FBI and ATF say they're on the scene cooperating with local partners. Local police add that all Jewish facilities in the area will have extra police presence while the investigation unfolds. They stress it's still very early in the investigation. Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan reacting to the attack, saying everyone deserves the right to worship in peace, and she is sick of such incidents happening across the country. Authorities will be providing more information in a presser at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. A shooter opened fire at Old Dominion University in Virginia this morning, killing one person and injuring two others. The gunman is dead. It's not immediately clear how the shooter died. Old Dominion has canceled classes and suspended all operations on its main campus in Norfolk for the rest of the day. The university is urging people to avoid the area and around Constant Hall while emergency personnel continue to work. Agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives are on the scene. Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger says she's monitoring the situation, and FBI Director Kash Patel says the Bureau is working with local authorities who responded to the shooting. The White House is calling on ABC News to retract a story for providing false information. The Trump administration accuses the outlet of intentionally alarming the American people. ABC published this article saying, quote, "The FBI warns police in California that Iran wants to retaliate for U.S. attacks by launching drones against the West Coast." However, the White House says ABC wrote the article based on just one email that was sent to local law enforcement in California about a single unverified tip. What's more, the email sent to police starts off by saying, quote, "We recently acquired unverified information." The ABC article includes that exact quote, but without the word unverified. The White House now states that, quote, "This post and story should be immediately retracted by ABC News for providing false information to intentionally alarm the American people." The U.S. military says Iran is losing air capability day by day. U.S. Central Command releasing footage yesterday showing strikes on 3 Iranian aircraft as well as strikes on boats and trucks. CENTCOM says U.S. forces aren't just defending against Iranian threats, but methodically dismantling them. President Trump adding the U.S. is striking the Iranian regime harder than virtually any country has been hit in history, and it's not done yet. Tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, a U.S.-owned oil tanker, was attacked near the southern coast of Iraq yesterday. Iraqi authorities say Iranian boats filled with explosives attacked the tanker, killing at least one crew member. The rest of the crew was rescued. Officials say another tanker was also targeted, a Maltese-flagged vessel operating in Iraqi waters. Iraqi authorities say the attacks threaten maritime safety and Iraq's energy sector. Several other ships across the region also reporting damage, among them a container ship flying the Japanese flag. During an interview with CNBC this morning, Energy Secretary Chris Wright saying the U.S. Navy is not yet ready to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz and likely won't be until the end of the month.
All of our military assets right now are focused on destroying Iran's ability to wage war and terrorize the neighborhood. When we can afford some additional assets to move tankers through the Straits of Hormuz, we will do that. That's coming. The Straits of Hormuz needs to be and will be reopened. The U.S. military is there to solve a long-term problem, which is Iran's had 47 years an ability to threaten the Straits of Hormuz, and not long from now, Iran would have nuclear arms and a massive missile program surrounding that. This was a can that could not be kicked down the road one more administration. We need to defang, and we are defanging Iran's abilities to threaten American troops in the areas, its allies, its neighbors, and global energy markets. So yes, you've got to go through short-term pain to solve a long-term problem. This is bold leadership of President Trump. This is what the world needs.
Oil prices fell slightly this afternoon after passing the $100 per barrel mark. Brent futures were up 8% at $99 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate crude was up almost 9% to over $93.
The problem is Iran's behavior, Iran's military, Iran's threatening for American troops, their neighbors, energy markets for 47 years. But the disruption of oil, temporary disruption of oil through the Straits of Hormuz, that's what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is for. So as we have a shortage of market coming through that avenue, we're going to bring oil to market through other avenues to get through a few weeks of a short-term dislocation to get to a much better place on the other side. It's the Asian refineries that we want to keep running and tamp down the price of oil to the extent we can through this few weeks crisis. President Trump's thinking long-term. He's not thinking about next month. He's thinking about what's best for the American people, what's best for the American economy, and what brings safety to our troops in the region and brings prosperity to the Middle East. That is a troubled region that needs to have its one major problem fixed.
President Trump says rising oil prices may benefit the United States, but stresses that his priority is stopping Iran from having nuclear weapons. On Truth Social this morning, Trump says the United States is the largest oil producer in the world by far. So when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money. But of far greater interest and importance to me as president is stopping an evil empire, Iran, from having nuclear weapons and destroying the Middle East and indeed the world. Trump ends his message by saying, "I won't ever let that happen." The Trump administration is tapping into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to ease rising gas prices amid the war with Iran. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports on that, plus new threats from Tehran to raise the stakes.
The Department of Energy announced 172 million barrels of oil will be released beginning next week. Energy Secretary Chris Wright says it will take approximately 120 days to deliver based on planned discharge rates. Wright accused previous administrations of leaving America's oil reserves drained and damaged. He says the Trump administration will replace these strategic reserves with approximately 200 million barrels within the next year. Wright says the most critical thing right now is the U.S. military degrading Iran's ability to project power, speaking on Fox News.
Not just missiles for long range, but also their assets that impede travel through the Straits of Hormuz. We are every hour of every day degrading their military ability to threaten ships in the Straits of Hormuz.
The Energy Secretary saying he hopes ship traffic will return to the Strait of Hormuz in the next few weeks and the world will return to normalcy.
But not the normalcy of before, normalcy minus a heavily armed, wildly empowered, murderous regime. They will be near completely defanged and will not be able to threaten U.S. soldiers in the region.
President Trump discussing the release of strategic reserve oil.
We're going to be doing it very quickly, and then we'll fill it up. We'll fill up our reserves.
Trump bringing up his first-term administration, filling up the reserves.
You know, if you remember, I filled them up, and then I had a deal to go at the highest level, a level that's never been, and Schumer and the Democrats for $25, and it was turned down.
Trump says his administration will focus on securing the Strait of Hormuz.
The straits are in great shape. We've knocked out all of their boats. They have some missiles, but not very many. I think we're in very good shape.
Meanwhile, the 32 member nations of the International Energy Agency unanimously agreed to release 400 million barrels of oil and refined products from their respective reserves. But Iran is hoping to undermine those efforts. Its military command warning the world to prepare for $200 a barrel oil prices as it struck 3 commercial vessels near the Strait of Hormuz. There have been 17 reports of incidents affecting vessels operating in the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman since the war began. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have warned that any ship passing through the narrow strait, which is just south of the country, will be targeted. Over to Asia, Japan will release 45 days' worth of strategic oil reserves as the war in Iran threatens supply chains.
Crude oil tankers remain effectively blocked from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. We expect crude oil imports to drop sharply from late this month.
Japan is dependent on the Middle East for around 95% of its oil supplies. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Some commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf are now identifying themselves as Chinese. At least 8 vessels have changed their transponder signals to messages such as Chinese owner or China owner, apparently to reduce the risk of being targeted. Analysts say Iran and affiliated groups have generally avoided ships linked to China given Beijing's strong ties with Iran. Most of the vessels are not China flagged, with flags including Panama and the Marshall Islands, though they may have business ties to China. Similar tactics were seen during earlier Houthi attacks in the Red Sea when vessels claimed links to China to avoid being targeted. This development underscores the ongoing risks for commercial shipping in the region as the conflict continues. President Trump says America is returning to real energy dominance, announcing the opening of the first new U.S. oil refinery in 50 years in Brownsville, Texas. Joining us now to talk about this is Daniel Turner, founder and executive director of Power the Future. Daniel, good afternoon to you. Can I just first off, your reaction to the $300 billion oil facility?
It's a huge step in the right direction. The refining problem has always been a choke point. You can produce all the crude that you want, and we are producing a record amount right now, 13.6 million barrels. But if your refining capacity doesn't increase, then it's not going to have the impact on overall pricing that you want increased production to have. So this is a really important step in the right direction. America needs to maintain its refining dominance of the world. China is trying to overtake America. They're far behind, but they are catching up very, very quickly. And we don't want to let any other country dominate the refining game.
Okay, why do we not want that? It seems obvious, but lay it out for us simply. Why do we not want other countries, such as adversaries like China, be dominant in this space?
Well, because crude doesn't really have value in and of itself. Crude oil only has value in what it becomes. And to have it become something, whether it's gasoline for a car, whether it's jet fuel, whether it's rocket fuel, whether it's the raw materials of plastic or of rubber or of anything else, all of that comes from the refining process. And if you control the refining process, then you control the raw materials for all the world's industry. That's why it's so important that America maintains this dominance, right? We saw this in previous worse administrations where we outsourced a lot of our raw materials, especially to places like communist China. And then they dominate those markets. And so, yes, we can talk about how, we want to be number one in furniture, or we want to be number one in automotives. But if the raw materials come from China, then we'll never be number one. We'll always be dependent upon them. And all raw materials come from the refining process.
Okay, so at the same time, Iran's new supreme leader is threatening energy supplies, saying the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. So in this context, amid everything that is happening, talk to us about the importance of energy independence. And I think this goes alongside of refining dominance.
It does. And you know what? I don't want to see Americans, or anyone for that matter, pay higher prices for gasoline or for utilities or for oil on the world market. But America is in a much better position than our Asian friends or than all of our European allies because we do have an abundant supply, domestic supply. If you are some of our Asian allies, if you're Europe, you're in a pickle right now because you desperately need your oil and gas to come from this part of the world. It makes no sense, especially if you have a domestic supply. A country like the United Kingdom has huge oil and gas reserves in the North Sea, but they shut them down for climate reasons. And so now they're dependent on the Middle East. A country like China, however, our number one adversary, they don't have a domestic oil and gas supply. So they need oil and gas from the Middle East. But because of just a geographical vulnerability that they have. So I'd rather be in America's position, but I'd much rather be in a place where there are no more tensions in this region of the world and we have stable pricing for this commodity.
So I'm just thinking here, based on what you said, does energy independence actually give the U.S. more power on the world stage? Because, for example, the U.S. can then impose sanctions on certain oil-producing countries without risking domestic shortages.
Absolutely. And evidence of that is just oil prices right now. When last I looked before we came live on this segment, West Texas Intermediary oil, the American exchange, was around $97 a barrel, which is a lot, right? But Murban, which is the oil exchange of the Middle East, was about $122. That's a $25 a barrel difference. That's a huge difference. And the difference is that American oil and gas, American oil numbers are domestic. We know we don't have a supply problem, but the Middle East does, right? They're having a transportation problem. They're stopping producing oil because they don't have a place to store it, because their storage is full, because they can't export it out because of the straits being closed. So that's an example of how energy dominance, domestic energy dominance, is so key to our survival, because our prices are $25 a barrel lower. And if we could return to more global stability, they'll come down even another $25 a barrel. Domestic energy production is everything in the game.
So I just want to read you a quote from President Trump. He says, "The United States is the largest oil producer in the world by far. So when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money." So I'm thinking here, Daniel, if the U.S. produces surplus energy, it can also export to allies, right? Could this also strengthen U.S. relations with allies, or even help allies avoid reliance on adversaries?
Absolutely. And we should be supplying all of our allies, right? So you take, for example, something like the natural gas pipeline that is being developed in Alaska, right? A $40 billion project, most of it funded by South Korea, by Japan, because these Asian nations who are our friends, they need natural gas supplies. And obviously it's a lot cheaper for them to go to Alaska, right, across the Pacific, than having to go all the way through the Panama Canal, et cetera, and get to America's Gulf Coast. So this is a wonderful example of how American energy dominance can benefit our allies. And we can keep the good guys, to put it very simply, we can keep the good guys energy independent, and we can choke the bad actors. In the case of Venezuela, Iran, or other countries, we can prevent them from becoming rich and powerful and a threat to America and our allies.
So Daniel, you brought up earlier briefly previous administrations that may have different ideologies when it comes to energy. Is oil, fossil fuels like oil, the most reliable source of energies in the U.S. right now?
Oil and gas and fossil fuels will always be reliable because we have them in abundance, because they work regardless of the weather. We don't need the sun. We don't need the wind. They are always reliable. But the biggest problem I have with the environmental left that has pushed the anti-fossil fuel movement, telling us to quote unquote go green and get wind and get solar. Wind and solar only produce electricity and poorly and very expensively, but that's all they do. Fossil fuels do everything else. It's rubber, it's plastic, it's Band-Aids, it's diapers, it's medicines, it's detergents, right? You can go through the list. So even the people that say, well, if we wouldn't have this problem if we drove EVs, EVs are great, but you know what they're made from? They're made from oil and gas and coal. So I don't understand why we would ever get rid of the raw materials of our industry, of cement, of steel, of plastic, of rubber, and pretend that we don't need these products. Wind and solar are stupid. They're expensive. They're made in slave labor camps in communist China, and they make very expensive, poor electricity. Fossil fuels do everything. And if we have a robust fossil fuel economy, we have peace, stability, low prices, and prosperity for everybody.
And just to add to your point, China uses coal to a significant degree for its energy, right? So
China does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know why? Because it works. I wish we were as serious about our electric grid as China is about theirs, right? What does China burn with their coal? They burn the factories to make crappy wind and solar. And then they convince Americans through these climate groups to buy them. But China uses coal because coal always works. China takes its grid very seriously. It takes its manufacturing sector very seriously. I wish American Democrats in particular would be as serious as the Chinese are about their grid.
Okay, just one final question, Daniel. Where do you see nuclear fitting into the equation?
Nuclear is great, and we need it in much more proliferation. We already run the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and it's called the United States Navy. We know how to use nuclear very, very well and very safely, and we've been doing it for decades. But nuclear is essential. I saw Secretary Wright announce that there were 10 nuclear projects underway. Countries like France get 80% of their electricity from nuclear power. So we should have a much more robust nuclear economy. 2 great nuclear power plants, one in California, one in New York, both shut down by Democrats, Gavin Newsom, and at the time, Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York. And there's no reason to take down or dismantle functioning nuclear power plants when we are desperate for reliable baseload power.
All right, great points, great conversation today, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
A bipartisan pair of senators unveiling a new bill aimed at protecting Falun Gong practitioners and countering forced organ harvesting in China. Here's more.
The bill is sponsored by Senators Ted Cruz and Jeff Merkley, and it's called the Falun Gong and Victims of Forced Organ Harvesting Protection Act. It targets foreign nationals deemed complicit in forced organ harvesting. Those individuals would be blocked from entering the U.S. or conducting U.S.-based transactions. Violating those sanctions could lead to significant financial penalties or even prison time. It would also require the U.S. government to report on China's organ transplant system and restrict cooperation with Chinese institutions in the field of transplantation. Senator Ted Cruz says the Chinese Communist Party runs a brutal state-backed organ harvesting system, and it targets people for their faith. He says Falun Gong practitioners are among those most heavily persecuted, calling the actions a serious violation of religious freedom as well as human rights. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a meditation practice with teachings focused on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. It's faced more than 26 years of deadly persecution in China, including constant police harassment, arbitrary arrests, imprisonment, and even torture. In 2019, the China Tribunal held in the UK concluded that forced organ harvesting is happening on a large scale in China, with Falun Gong practitioners being the main group that's targeted.
A bipartisan bill aimed at curbing the state-sanctioned crime of forced organ harvesting against prisoners of conscience in China has been introduced in the U.S. Senate. The bill shines a light on the crimes against humanity committed by the Chinese regime as its rule faces threats both internally and externally. Internal power struggles and purges have reportedly destabilized the Chinese Communist Party. Meanwhile, the war in Iran hampers critical oil supplies and a key ally, the Iranian regime. Joining us now is Ambassador Sam Brownback. He's the co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Summit and former U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure. So, as you're aware, NTD News has been covering the Chinese regime's human rights abuses for decades now, of course, including its practice of live forced organ harvesting against prisoners of conscience like Falun Gong adherents, as well as Uyghur Muslims. So I want to ask you, Ambassador, why is a bill like this so important? And why is it so important now more than ever?
Well, first, I'd like to thank NTD for covering this when other people weren't, and still covering it and staying really on point with this. I just think that's critical, the information that you're putting out. This is a key time for us in our confrontation with the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party is seeking to run the world. They've got an alliance built up. We're at war with one of their allies right now in Iran. And I think we've got to continue to confront them, and particularly in the moral area of what they do. And things like forced organ harvesting, which is just a diabolical thing, need to be brought to the light, shown to the American public and to the world that this is a regime in China that's actually willing to do something so horrific it's almost unimaginable. And that's why I think these are important, that the bill's coming forth in a bipartisan way, and that there's even a book just out. I did the foreword on it about the forced organ harvesting. These are things that are key to bring forward.
So you said it's diabolical, live organ harvesting. I just want you to spell it out for us simply. What does this say about the nature of the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party, and its regard for humanity?
It means it's a commodity. It means it's a commodity to be bought and sold by a regime that looks at the people in the country that it doesn't like as somebody that they can sell their parts, their organs. For most people, their consciousness of that, it is so evil that they look at it and they can hardly believe that this would actually take place. And so what people tend to do is just kind of put it off to the side and say no. But that's why it's got to be surfaced and continue to be put in front of the American public, because it reveals the nature of the regime. Ronald Reagan talked about the Soviet Union and the godless communists there and what they did to the Jewish refuseniks. What we're talking about here is a same communist, anti-God, godless ideology, and what they're willing to do to a group, religious adherents that they disagree with. This is horrific. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be pushed. And it needs to showcase what the CCP actually is and what they're willing to do.
And Ambassador, I just want to bring to your attention that a number of analysts are saying that fundamentally the Iran war is about all about countering China. And there's also several China hawks like Gordon Chang, who is saying effectively all of the Trump administration's policy centers around countering the Chinese regime. And I bring this to your attention, Ambassador, because you have spoken extensively over the years about how countering the CCP is good for humanity. Can you just elaborate more on this for us?
Well, either the world is going to change China or China is going to change the world. That's what's going to take place. These are two systems, the Chinese Communist Party system that they have and Western democracy that we have, that stand counter to each other. And they continue to come up into conflict with each other, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or Iran, the United States now. They seek to run the world, just as the Soviet Union sought to run the world. And I wish we could avoid it. I wish we could ignore it. I wish we could just say, you stay in your part of the world, we'll stay in our part of the world. And it just doesn't work that way. We have to counter this regime, or you're going to continue to see their infiltration into various places. You're going to see their continued assertions into Africa and Latin America that are happening. And thank goodness the Trump administration is confronting them and confronting them directly. And now is the time to do it before they get stronger. And we need to break apart our economies, the United States economy from the Chinese economy, because they're using that and they want to leverage that in any and everywhere they can to weaken and harm us. This is a fight that we haven't asked for, but it's a fight we're going to have to finish.
Okay, so you're saying this is a fight we have to finish. What do you say to the argument, the narrative coming out of Chinese officials and other people who say that China, or rather, America should just worry about its own backyard and that it should coexist alongside the CCP as a secondary world power?
Well, that's not working for us in Iran, where you've got a regime there that's threatening us and threatening the world energy supplies. And if they get a nuclear weapon, they will blackmail the world with that. I've said previously that Iran, it's not now or never in our confrontation with Iran. It's now or nuclear. They will go nuclear. And once they get a nuclear weapon, they will blackmail the world with this. We cannot stand that. And that's a key ally of China's. And you're seeing what Russia often talks about, their nuclear weapons and now their triad system of delivering those nuclear weapons. Why are they talking about that all the time? Because they want to blackmail the world with that, and certainly Europe with that. I wish we weren't headed into this direct of a confrontation, but that's where we are. And it's better to stand up to them now than later when they could be stronger, more diffuse in places around the world, and attacking us in more ways than even's taking place now.
So, Ambassador, we talked about the security perspective of countering China, the CCP. Do you think America has a moral responsibility to counter the threat of the Chinese Communist Party?
Absolutely, and I think it's our strongest card. We stand for a religious freedom. It's a foundational principle for us. It's in our original charter documents. It's why the Pilgrims came over in the Mayflower in the first place. They look at religion itself as an existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party's control. Communism is an ideology that has no space for God or the divine or the eternal. The ultimate authority is the state, and the state has to run everything, and you can't pursue an authority above that. And yet in most people's heart, there's this yearning for something that's beyond here, a truth, an existence that people seek, and they invest their lives and they invest their families in that. And we'll say you should be allowed to pursue that freedom, and the Chinese Communist Party rules it out completely. And not only that, spends billions of dollars to oppress and suppress and even do things as diabolical as forced organ harvesting to people, adherents that they disagree with. These are fundamentally different systems. They confront each other, and we do the world a service by standing up for freedom. And I think it's our strongest card. I think it's our strongest case, is to stand on that moral authority that comes with the position that we're in.
All right, Ambassador, well said. I just want to end with this. I'm very much curious as to what you think about what's playing out on the world stage right now with Iran, Venezuela, geopolitics, everything that's happening. Just your perspective on that.
I think President Trump is playing a very strong hand, and I think he's playing it well. I think he's showing our erstwhile adversaries that he means business, and he's going to go directly at it. The move in Venezuela was a magnificent move, in my estimation, to be able to pull out Maduro and hopefully move that country back into a sensible democratic format. And we may be able to get a bank shot of Cuba in the process with it. And going at Iran is a direct one of the original axis of evil countries that China was allied with. But China is the puppet master behind all of this. And I think each time we can confront and take down one of these nations that's in the alliance of evil, it shows the weakness of the overall system that they have and their inability to really be able to move this on forward. And it's better to do it now while we can, and while you have a bold and a courageous president and President Trump willing to confront these evils, then we'll wait. Let them build strength up. Let them build the alliance up even stronger. I think the way he's going at it, too, just in a sequential fashion, is really a very helpful thing he is doing for the entire world, and the United States will benefit greatly by it.
Okay, fantastic comments, Ambassador Brownback. I just want to thank you for all that you do, and thank you for speaking with us today.
My pleasure.
The Senate today examining the issue of malign foreign influence at U.S. colleges and universities and what can be done about it. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the key takeaways from a hearing on Capitol Hill.
We need to know if other countries are trying to steal research or influence our campuses with an anti-American ideology.
Senate lawmakers and experts discuss the problem of maliciously intended foreign influence at U.S. universities.
I think it was a 2019 Senate investigation revealed that Chinese intellectual property theft on campus robbed us of $200 to $600 billion a year.
Did you know that in China they passed 2 laws that require all nationals, not just their students, but all nationals to cooperate with the CCP and provide information on demand?
I'm concerned, yes, that we are in a situation where the Chinese students are subject to state pressure to cooperate with their government. Even if they don't want to, they will.
Senator Bill Cassidy says that in 2020, the Department of Justice indicted a Harvard University chemistry chairman for lying about his affiliation with China's Thousand Talents plan.
A research recruitment program run by the Chinese Communist Party to lure talented Chinese students back to China.
Dr. Peter Wood says that China's Confucius Institutes, which have a history of influencing Americans, have rebranded, but their goal remains the same.
What do Americans actually know about China? Well, if they are engaged in universities with Confucius Institutes or their successors, they're not learning anything about the South China Sea, Tibet, the Uyghurs, organ harvesting, the vast number of mischievous things, let's call them, that China engages in and that the American public knows very little about.
Another expert explained that some American universities that have campuses in other countries don't have full control over what's taught there.
In many of these cases, the host government nation, China or Qatar, is in charge of curricula development.
Is that true?
Yes.
You're talking about an American Institute of Higher Education.
Correct.
Prestigious.
Yes.
Who gets the dollars.
Yes.
But they would cede authorship of their curriculum to another?
That's correct.
Largely, there was a bipartisan agreement that the U.S. needs to find ways to deal with these issues without excluding people or groups that do make donations or study at U.S. colleges without malicious intent. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
At the opening hours of the strikes on Iran, Tehran's surveillance empire built for monitoring citizens helped the U.S. and Israel track the whereabouts of Ali Khamenei, leading to his death. China, the hand that helped build this system for Iran, was unaware it had been hacked by the U.S. for years. The news would send chills through Beijing's leadership. That's because China is operating a surveillance system using the same equipment, but on a much larger scale. Here's more.
According to a Financial Times report last week, before the strikes, U.S. and Israeli intelligence have been observing Iran's streets for years. They used AI models to analyze real-time footage, systematically understanding the regime's internal operations. This intelligence significantly helped the U.S. and Israel target and eliminate the Islamic regime leader. An Israeli intelligence official told the paper that they knew Tehran like they knew Jerusalem. It's worth noting those same surveillance cameras are also stationed around Beijing streets right now. Top Chinese manufacturers, including Hikvision, Dahua, and Tiandi, supply the Islamic regime with surveillance tech ranging from softwares to equipments for decades. That's not only because Beijing and Tehran are allies. The need to control its people has pushed the Chinese regime to continue developing this technology more than any other country. Zineb Ribois, a policy analyst specializing on Middle East and China, sheds light on the matter.
If one looks at it, China has helped Iran's whole telecommunications architecture. They have reshaped it exactly as they would do in Beijing. A lot of those crackdowns that happened in January against the protesters, they happened in such a brutality because Iran was able to use Chinese technology that was absolutely sophisticated, but also made in a way that they could track very easily who wears a hijab or not, who is doing this or that, because they perfected it in Uyghur camps.
China has more surveillance cameras than any other country and also dominates exports of this technology worldwide. For years, governments have raised concerns about backdoors in these Chinese products. Officials worry the cameras could act as Beijing's eyes on their streets. The problem is, it's not just Beijing that could access these backdoors. Hackers could too. In 2023, a U.S.-based tech company hacked a Chinese Hikvision camera within 11 seconds. It was part of an experiment in collaboration with the BBC. The U.S. company warns the vulnerability is linked to a backdoor Hikvision built into its cameras, a claim the Chinese company denies.
China analysts say the Chinese regime's surveillance tools to monitor and suppress dissidents could backfire. While the regime is monitoring its citizens, Washington special agents may be watching too. And now panel guests join us for their thoughts on how essentially the Trump administration's policies are countering the Chinese regime. We have now Nathan Su, investigative reporter for the Epoch Times, and Rick Fisher, a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center and an international military analyst. Welcome both, and good afternoon to you. So several U.S. strategic analysts note that Beijing has been heavily invested in energy development in Iran and Venezuela. Therefore, actions against these nations objectively affect China's energy supply and investment interests. And this was a strategic decision behind the Venezuela and Iran operations. So Rick, can I just start with you on this issue? What do you think? And do we have more evidence of that?
Very clearly, if not at the front, then definitely in the middle and the back of the Trump administration calculations and considerations as it makes decisions on where to move Venezuela, Iran, has to be the impact on China and the degree to which this increases American leverage, not just in the particular region, but globally, and especially as the Chinese approach the time that they're considering for an invasion of Taiwan, by addressing China's proxies, if you will, weakening those proxies, it is possible, I would presume the administration is considering it is able to affect Beijing's calculation for its own timeline, hopefully to delay that timeline or delay another war, potentially a nuclear war over Taiwan.
So Nathan, it's not explicitly said by the administration that this is targeting China, but essentially, effectively, are these policies targeting the Chinese Communist Party?
Yes, of course. If you look at the Trump National Security Strategy, which was published in November of last year, well known for its downgrade principle. Now, the problem is if you go back to the downgrade principle, most people say that's to put focus on the Western Hemisphere, basically the American continent. But if you really read into that strategy, the Western Hemisphere only got less than 4 pages, while Asia part, it's got 5 pages. And in that part, Taiwan's name was mentioned 6 times. So, the downgrade principle that to, increase the security and safety of Americans' backyard in American continent has a purpose. The purpose is to defeat to deter the threat from the CCP in the Western Pacific. Now, if you look at the geopolitics from the geopolitical part of it, if you really look in what's happening, now the United States got 30 airlines in the NATO, 30 European airlines in the NATO, but that 30 airlines, airline nations in Europe, roughly about the same economic size and population with the United States. That 30 countries plus Ukraine, that's 31 countries only dealing with Russia, while the United States with its 6 airlines in the Pacific area, that's South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand. We are dealing with China, which got 9 times of economic power of Russia. China's economic size by GDP is roughly 9 times of Russia. Now, if help is mutual, our European allies are supposed to help us instead of we are helping them. This is just insanely imbalanced. That's why we need to really focus on China. China's it's got a largest naval force by counting on the total number of warships. Also, China has the biggest shipbuilding power in the world. Both the year of 2023 and 2024, China received more than 50% of international new shipbuilding orders. So they can quickly build up their naval power, while at the same time, we are way behind. China, more than 50% of international shipbuilding power, while United States, we only have less than 1% of the international. We were talking about the shipbuilding power in the globe.
So, Rick, amid this conflict with Iran, oil has become a talking point, energy, right? And President Trump has made it a strong focus on energy security for the U.S. So I want to ask you this. How does this relate to defending U.S. national security interests against China?
Well, of course, the United States requires a secure energy source. And the president has spent a great deal of time focusing on the American domestic petroleum sector, unleashing the frackers, most recently welcoming one of the first major refining investors from India into Texas, first time in a new refining center in 50 years. But controlling the Straits of Hormuz, controlling the access to Middle Eastern oil provides a tremendous amount of leverage that contributes to the defense and security of the United States, inasmuch as China relies on Iran's oil, Middle Eastern oil, for 17 or more % of its annual foreign petroleum consumption. This is a big deal for the Chinese Communist Party leadership. And when President Trump walks into his summit with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, either at the end of March or the first part of April, he will have gathered this leverage, control over the Straits of Hormuz, and essentially control over Venezuela's oil sector, all of which will rebound to the security of the United States.
Now, Nathan, if you have anything to add to what Rick said, please do so. And can you also please talk to us about how Trump's tariffs policy is impacting China and whether that's a greater impact on the tariffs on U.S. on allies versus China?
Well, first of all, China's oil consumption is heavily depending on the import. 70% of the oil consumption in China depending on import, and half of them are from Middle East. So, to control, to defeat the Iranian regime in the Middle East and to unite our allies in the Middle East is very important, for us to have energy security if we need to deter the threat from the CCP in the Western Pacific. Now, talk about the tariffs. Tariffs had a great impact on China's economy. In the past 40 years, China's economic growth mainly depending on two sectors. One is their real estate sector, and another one is exporting. And the impact of tariffs on the goods from China to the United States have greatly impacted the economic growth in China. Now we have seen that a lot of special economic zone nowadays, a lot of factories shut down because they don't have enough international orders. Now China does keep its exporting, even though the tariffs from the United States have been dramatically increased. But however, think about that. There's a huge change after the tariffs. The U.S. tariffs has been added on to the export from China to the United States. Why? Now think about this. If one spoon is made in China, it will be sold if it's sold to the United States, every spoon, the Chinese manufacturer can make probably roughly $2. But if that same spoon not sold to the U.S. market, but sold, say, Indonesia, Malaysia, or Thailand, they probably are going to make like 30 or 50, or maybe 50 cents. So even though their total exporting amount is still increasing after the U.S. tariffs, but they have been making a lot less money.
So Rick, you can talk a little about tariffs if you wish, but also what are your thoughts on the president's trade restrictions and sanctions as well on Chinese tech companies? Your thoughts?
Well, Don, I won't go there, but what I think is important to highlight is the continuity between President Trump's first term and his second term. So many policies that he started in his first term designed to contain threats from China have been continued in the second term. I would mention specifically his space policies. He revived the American moon program. Obama canceled it. Trump has continued the moon program, and he is pushing for it. He wants Americans back on the moon before he leaves office, and this is going to be a great task. Control of the moon, sustaining access to the moon, is all about ensuring dominance in cislunar space, and then dominance in low Earth orbit and dominance on Earth. President Trump's space program is not just about securing freedom for America, but really securing freedom for Western civilization. Because if the Chinese get control of the moon and control the space between the Earth and the moon in low Earth orbit, they will become militarily dominant and will push their agenda down our throats.
Okay, Nathan, a little bit different of a question here today. Right now, I reported earlier that we saw a bipartisan bill that would sanction perpetrators in China who attack the religious freedom of groups like Falun Gong and sanction individuals involved in forced organ harvesting. So can you just explain for us why atrocities like forced organ harvesting and persecuting faith groups is able to take place under the Chinese communist regime?
Well, if you look at that, the U.S. government's trade and economic policy to China in the past quarter century, we need to realize that there have been big mistake was made, and luckily we already corrected them. On March the 9th, 2000, President Clinton gave a speech on trade and economic policy to China in Johns Hopkins University. Basically, that whole speech was focused on detached human rights from the trade and economic policy, and to allow the economic investment from the United States, from the Western world, going to China, and hoping that investments to China will change China's political system, and that basically brutally failed, and which was for the exact same reason that we have seen so many changes in the 25 years after we invest like hundreds of billions of dollars to China, and make the communist regime in China become the biggest threat in human history to peace and humanity, and of course the security threat to the United States, and that's the same reason that for the same reason Secretary Yellen in 2023 went back to the same university, make another speech by putting the priority of our trade and economic policy as security and human rights. Now, if we go back to like a quarter centuries ago, like in 2000, when the U.S. government made the detachment between human rights and the economic and trade policy, that was exactly less than a year after Chinese communist regime started, I would say, the largest scale of religious persecution in China. That's the persecution against the Falun Gong group. That's more than 100 million people practicing that faith in China. Now, when we talk about using a trade and economic policy to change China, we forgot one very fundamental element of democracy. That's religious freedom. Without religious freedom, you're just not going to have any democracy. We forgot that fundamental element, and we were hoping by giving money to Chinese regime, we will be able to change the political system in China. Of course, it's not going to work. And I'm glad that we are coming back. We realize that mistake we made before, and we trying to change that. We trying to promote the religious freedom in China.
Okay, I just want to highlight finally what Nathan said, that religious freedom is a core part of democracy. Let's leave it there for today. Really appreciate the both of you giving us your time today. Nathan, Rick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune announcing the Save America Act will be coming to the floor next week.
At the core of the Save America Act is the requirement that individuals provide proof of citizenship to register to vote, and then show an ID when they go to the polls. In other words, it would require Americans to demonstrate that they're eligible to vote, and that they are who they say they are when they go to do so.
President Trump has been pushing hard for passage of the Save America Act, which he has said would guarantee the midterms for Republicans. The House has already passed two versions of it, but the Senate has been debating over their own version for weeks. Thune is calling the act a package of common sense policies. He says photo IDs are required for a number of things, including travel, working for the government, and at public libraries. Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the act Jim Crow 2.0. He and other Democrats have been arguing that it would create new barriers to voting. President Trump has threatened to not sign any bills until the act is passed. Texas Senator John Cornyn says he would support ending the filibuster to pass the contentious Save America Act. The move comes as Cornyn seeks President Trump's endorsement in his Republican primary runoff against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Cornyn saying he supports whatever changes to Senate rules that may be necessary to move the Save America Act forward and fund the Department of Homeland Security. The Texas senator has long defended the filibuster as a safeguard in the Senate, but he says the political reality in Washington has changed. The Save America Act would require individuals to prove U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. Republican leaders are now preparing to bring the bill to the Senate floor. They're planning for days of marathon sessions, including possibly scheduling overnight sessions to force Democrats to stay on the floor. Moody's ratings today downgrading New York City's credit outlook from stable to negative. Mayor Zohran Mamdani weighing in during a press conference as he proposes a $127 billion budget.
With Moody's outlook change, I think given the $5 billion in additional funding that both the Senate and the Assembly put forward for the city in their one-house budget proposals that are being voted on today, I think that the decision to revise the outlook, frankly, is premature. I do acknowledge that they are maintaining the city's credit rating at AA2. The proposals that we're seeing from Albany reflect a real commitment to ensuring that we can bridge this inherited fiscal deficit and do so while continuing to invest in the city services that so many New Yorkers rely on.
As part of his budget proposal, Mamdani is pushing for an income tax increase on New Yorkers earning more than $1 million a year. Mamdani's plan would also raise the top corporate tax rate. In its decision, Moody's cited the city's projected budget gaps, underlying structural imbalance, and reduced financial flexibility. A downgraded credit rating would raise the city's borrowing costs. In a statement, New York City's comptroller called Moody's decision a sobering wake-up call about the fiscal challenges ahead. 2 men have been charged with attempting an ISIS-linked bombing during protests outside the New York City mayor's home, Gracie Mansion. Joining us now for legal analysis is Bobby Ann Cox, civil rights attorney and fellow at the Brownstone Institute. Bobby Ann, good to see you. So they're facing a number of charges, as you are aware of, so one of them being attempting to give material support to ISIS. So how strong is the case based on what we know so far against them?
So what we know so far is that both of these individuals, when they were arrested, they did make statements to the arresting officers, and once they were brought into the police station, outwardly saying that they were doing this as a promotion and incentivized by ISIS, and that they pledged allegiance to ISIS. So that count sounds like it's going to be pretty strong against them. They are being charged with several counts of different violations of different federal laws. But this one in particular, it sounds like they both outright pledged their allegiance to ISIS. And so it sounds like that's going to be a very strong cause of action against each one of these individuals.
So another charge is the use of a weapon of mass destruction. Why is an improvised explosive device in this context being charged as a weapon of mass destruction?
Right. So if you look at the federal law itself, what is defined as a weapon of mass destruction is anything that is, a device, a destructive device. So that could be a bomb, it could be a rocket, it could be a grenade, things of this sort. And it's anything that is used that would have mass casualties. So when you look at this, situation in specific, we look at what was being used. So these two individuals, they made these 2 bombs themselves. And what they did was the material used was highly explosive. And then they wrapped it in shrapnel, what would have become shrapnel if they had detonated. Things like, nuts and bolts and screws, things like this. So when you look at what they used to make these bombs, and then you saw where they were going to use them, they were planning to use these at a protest outside Gracie Mansion in New York City. So it was a large crowd of people that they were going to detonate these bombs in. So when you look at the intent behind what they were planning to do, and you look at the hard evidence itself, what the bombs actually were made out of, it would fall under that definition of a weapon of mass destruction as per the federal law.
Okay, understood. Looking at the intent and the actual evidence there. So as well, the suspects are teenagers, right? 18 and 19. Does their age at all affect how the court might view sentencing if they're convicted?
Not really in an instance like this. They are being charged with some very serious federal crimes, and they have the weight of the potential prison sentences for these crimes is tremendous. One is life in prison, another one is 20 years, another one is 10 years. These are very serious crimes that they are being charged with. When it comes time for sentencing, and sentencing can arise either because they go through a jury trial, so a trial of their peers that hear the evidence and then make a decision, as to whether or not they're guilty or innocent, and then the judge would set a sentence, or if they end up doing a plea deal, then the next step is the judge would issue sentencing. So I'm not sure that they would quote unquote get a break because they are both technically still teenagers when the federal charges that are being pushed against them or brought against them are such as these, and they're very serious. And these are issues of national security, since they did both pledge an allegiance to a foreign terrorist organization. So we're going to see how this plays out, but these are very serious charges.
Right. As you mentioned, their statement appeared to show that they have strong ties to ISIS, and police have already found out that they consumed ISIS propaganda material. So you said earlier this is a strong case of the links to ISIS. Do you think police will have to investigate even further to build on this case, or could they just leave it as it is right now?
Well, I think there will be further investigation. Something so serious as this, they're probably going to dig further. They are already coordinating with, FBI and law enforcement in Pennsylvania, because both of these individuals are originally from Pennsylvania, and they drove to New York City to perpetrate this crime. So there will be further investigation because, they're going to want to know not just why they did this and how they did this, but they're going to also want to know if anybody else helped them in preparing for this or planning this or purchasing the materials to make those bombs. Those are things that the law enforcement officials are going to be investigating, because it might not be only these two individuals. There might be other people involved at different levels and different stages of this. So they have to determine whether or not these individuals acted on their own, or if there is something deeper and a wider group behind them. I did read one or two accounts that said that these two individuals did not know each other prior to this taking place last week. So it sounds like they didn't intentionally plan this together. But again, I'm sure there will be further investigations by law enforcement officials at both the federal level and the local level to see what else they can find out, and as much detail as possible.
Okay, Bobby, and just one final question. What comes next in this case?
So both of these individuals have been arrested. They are being held in jail without bail. So they're going to have, to wait in jail until they have their first hearing, their first appearance in court. And we have to see, the formal charges that are brought in court. We don't know if there's going to be any talk about plea deals or not. We don't know if there's going to be, we have to see how it plays out. Could be a jury trial, could be a plea deal. But anyway, either way that it goes, there will be sentencing. And I do expect that sentencing is going to be severe. We did see in the 2017 ISIS-induced attack in New York City that occurred on the bike path, as an individual had used a truck to blow up the truck and ended up killing 8 innocent victims that were standing by and injuring others. In that case, that individual back in 2017 was charged, and just in 2023, the jury came down and he had multiple life sentences against him. So, he's in jail for the rest of his life, and then some. And so, these are serious charges. These are serious accusations, and we have to see how this plays out in court.
Right. All right, Bobby Yan, thank you for speaking with us today. Good to talk to you.
Yes, thanks for having me on.
A new class action lawsuit against Meta over privacy concerns related to the firm's AI smart glasses. This comes after an investigative report by 2 Swedish newspapers saying that images and videos captured with the glasses are routinely reviewed by contractors in Kenya. NTD's Sean Marshall has more details.
Meta has another lawsuit on its hands over their AI smart glasses. The nationwide class action lawsuit claims Meta made a reassuring promise. The glasses were designed for privacy controlled by you. But the suit claims this promise is false.
Many people don't know that the AI that is captured in Meta as part of their EULA is often sent for human labelers to review. And those people are often outside this country. So you may have personal data or private information or even personal images of you and your loved ones that is viewable by people legally as part of the agreement of using Meta glasses.
What gave this case some legs to move was a recent Swedish whistleblower investigation. It revealed that when consumers use the Meta AI glasses' AI features, the footage is not processed privately or locally. Instead, videos captured through the glasses, including highly sensitive moments inside homes and other private spaces, are transmitted to Meta's servers and then routed to a subcontractor in Kenya, where human workers manually view and label the footage to train Meta's AI models.
We're discovering just how invasive this tech can be and really the negative impacts of this tech when it goes unregulated. So hopefully we can have case law now lead to an outcome that will allow judges to really determine how wearables should be regulated, how we should protect the users of these wearables and their privacy as well. And hopefully this pushes for some statutory regulation as well.
Meta has shown time and time again that they're ill-equipped to deal with privacy of individuals at scale. And so this encroachment into an incredibly suspect world of facial recognition should be viewed with a lot of skepticism because they don't have a great track record at both privacy and equitable use of this kind of technology.
According to the complaints filed by Clarkson law firm, Gina Bartoni of New Jersey and Mateo Canu of California relied on Meta's privacy claims and say they would not have bought the product if they had known that some captured footage could be reviewed by contractors.
What's interesting too is we expect AI to review all this footage, but these were actual workers reviewing it, which adds another layer of feeling your privacy is extremely violated because you're not consenting to that individual seeing that recording either. So this is very interesting. There was some potential deception obviously put forth to the public on how safe this product is and how you can control the privacy that might be violated or protected with this product and your choice to record or not record. And I'm really excited to see how this will lead to a push for safer measures to be put in place as wearables become more and more popular.
The lawsuit seeks monetary damages and injunctive relief. It also argues that the review process undermines the product's privacy claims. We reached out to Meta for a statement but did not receive any reply by the time of this story. Sean Marshall, NTD News.